Wherever you're listening in the world, it's a pleasure to welcome you to IsraelCast, the podcast powered by Jewish National Fund USA, your voice in Israel. I'm Stephen Shalowitz, first reminding you that for over 120 years, Jewish National Fund USA has been the premier philanthropic movement for the land and people of Israel. While best known for planting trees in Israel, JNF USA contributes to Israeli life in so many ways, including community development in the Negev and the Galilee, preservation of heritage sites, supporting people with disabilities, connecting high school and college students to Israel, and helping our brothers and sisters in need following the heinous October 7th terrorist attack. To learn more and to see how you can contribute, do visit jnf.org. Once again, jnf.org. Plus, if you haven't done so already, we'd really love it if you subscribe, rated, and reviewed us, 5 stars, of course, wherever you get your podcasts. And we'd love it too if you shared the show within your orbit. All right, as for this episode, what a pleasure it is to welcome Shabbos Kestenbaum to the program. Shabbos is a student activist and received national attention as lead plaintiff in a landmark lawsuit against Harvard University alleging pervasive and systemic anti-Semitism. He's a regular contributor in a variety of media outlets and has most notably testified multiple times in front of the U.S. Congress as well as the Israeli Knesset. You may also have seen him delivering a rather powerful speech at the 2024 Republican National Convention. Well, these days, Shabbos is the newest PragerU personality. And with that, we very warmly welcome Shabbos Kestenbaum to IsraelCast, who joins us on the line via Zoom. Shabbos, lovely to have you aboard the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, and I'm guessing you're dialing in from the City of Angels, Los Angeles.
Yes, sir. I just moved here to start my job with PragerU. It's been an interesting transition. Yeah, coming in from LA.
All right, very good. And thanks for waking up early in the morning to do this. We should add and share with our dear audience. All right. Well, listen, Shabbos, I wanted to have you on now because as we release this episode, a new academic year is really just beginning. And I want you to frame what has gone on and what you see moving forward vis-a-vis Jewish and Israeli students, their life on campus. And we'll be hitting a bunch of other topics as well in the course of our conversation. But really, just by way of background, we have a very global audience. We have listeners in countries with which Israel doesn't even have diplomatic ties. So we should share that with you as well. And I'd really like to start with your story and start with the anti-Semitism you saw and experienced when you got to Harvard. This was pre-October 7th. And I want to do that because some listeners might not be familiar with your particular story.
Certainly. So I'm from an Orthodox American household. I'm a first generation American. I'm one of 7 siblings, which is fairly typical for my community. I was born on Shabbos, hence the name Shabbos, which is the Hebrew word for the Sabbath. And after going to Jewish day school my whole life, I did what's again fairly typical for my community, which I decided to live in Israel and attend an all-male Orthodox, really ultra-Orthodox yeshiva called Aish Torah. So I was living in the old city of Jerusalem for 2 years, 2 minutes away from the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Western Wall, the Dome of the Rock. And I was infused with a sense not only of passion for Judaism, but also a genuine intellectual interest in the study of religion. And that's not fairly typical for an Orthodox Jew to have a multitude of interests in other religions, not necessarily because you recognize the divinity in it, simply because, in my opinion, for example, the study of theology is not merely the study of theology, it's the study of history and sociology and culture and anthropology. So I decided after my 2 years in yeshiva that I wanted to pursue a master's degree focusing on religion, the religions of the world. And typically, as I said, if you're an Orthodox Jew and you're interested in religion, you would stay in yeshiva and receive rabbinic ordination. What you won't do is decide to study in a secular, pluralistic, non-sectarian divinity school with women, with gays, with Muslims, with atheists. And I had decided that's what I wanted to do while I was relatively young, to not have many responsibilities, was not married, and really could just spend a couple of years devoted to intellectual pursuits. So I get to Harvard Divinity School. Lo and behold, I got in. And quite quickly, it became readily apparent that there was a double standard by which minority students were treated and Jewish students were treated. Just to give you one quick example, Harvard University was ranked by the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expressions, which is an American NGO tracking free speech and the First Amendment on college campuses. Harvard was ranked dead last, 248th out of 248 American universities when it came to their commitments to free speech. This is a university that, rightly or wrongly, disciplines speech they don't like. They regulate speech they don't like. They disinvite controversial speakers. They demote professors if they come out with an unpopular political opinion, which makes it all the more strange that my first month of being a student at Harvard, Muhammad El-Kurd, someone who's appeared on the ADL's top 10 anti-Semites list, someone who said that Jews eat the organs of Palestinians, that we must normalize massacres, that all Zionists must perish, that the Israeli occupying forces are akin to the Nazis. When he was invited to speak by the Harvard Palestine Solidarity Committee, well, we went to the university, the admin, DEI, the interim president. We said, well, hang on a second. Rightly or wrongly, you have this strong track record that I was just mentioning. Well, why don't you apply that same logic to someone who's so vehemently anti-Semitic? As I said, he's on the ADL's list. And Harvard said, well, he has a First Amendment right. What do you want us to do about it? Which I would accept that argument if that was an argument from a university that believed it and that actually acted on that, like the University of Chicago, which takes the approach that all ideas, good, bad, reprehensible, will be shared and explored at our campus. Harvard never took that attitude. Harvard has consistently said that we will regulate speech so that minorities can feel safe, included, and welcomed. The only exception, of course, is Jewish students. I could talk about the fact that Harvard, in the post-George Floyd backlash, renamed offensive terminology to ensure that African Americans felt safe and included. So, for example, whereas a resident advisor, an RA, was called a master of the house, it's now called the dean of the house because they want to make sure every student's included. There was a serious effort to rename one of the undergraduate dorms called Winthrop House because Winthrop owned slaves. Yet the plurality of Jewish undergrads at Harvard live in Lowell House. Lowell House is named after Abbott Lowell, the president of Harvard in the 20s and 30s, who tried instituting a quota, a legalized metric of discrimination whereby he capped the amount of Jews allowed on Harvard's campus, saying that there were too many Jews at the university. So hang on a second. If you're going to play the DEI game that, again, all minority students should feel safe and included, well, then, okay, play the game. The problem is Harvard has consistently, historically, and routinely deployed a double standard when it comes to their treatment of minority students and their treatment of Jews. And this led to me writing an article for H.com, the yeshiva I went to, entitled Anti-Semitism at Harvard. And I wrote it in October of 2022. And I was saying there's writing on the wall here. There's a very bizarre acceptance of a double standard. I could tell you about the political indoctrination, the fact that there was a class being taught called Religion and Peace, the Case of Israel-Palestine, whereby the professor went up on the first day of class and said that the Zionist narrative is the dominant narrative. And in order to understand both sides of the story, we in this class will not study, read, learn, or discuss any texts if they were written by Israelis. What?
Yeah, it's like, how can you have a class without understanding that side of the argument?
Exactly. I mean, I could give you other examples
Sure.
of more classes that I took whereby the professors said explicitly that their goal was to de-Zionize Jews, that their goal was for us to recognize the white privilege and the apartheid and genocidal aspects of the state of Israel. We were taught as fact that historically the Jew has been powerless. And with the advent of the state of Israel in the 20th and 21st century, the only way the Jew knows how to exert and exhibit their newfound power is, in fact, by internalizing the ways of Nazi Germany. I mean, this was taught to us as fact.
And again,
So
this is before, we have to underscore Shabbos, it's before October 7th.
it is all before
Yeah.
October
And
2nd.
I should just say anecdotally, because I've had relatives that have gone to Colombia. And I remember probably 8, 10 years ago, them sharing with me just the lies about Israel that were spewed out in the classroom as well. So this has been going on really for decades.
Yeah, and I'm so happy you mentioned Colombia because your listeners might be familiar with a documentary called Colombia Unbecoming. This was a documentary made more than 20 years ago, and it was documenting the anti-Israel and anti-Semitic tendencies of a particular Columbia University professor, Joseph Massad. And the reason I became familiar with this documentary is because I spoke on a panel last year where we played the film, and then we had contemporary Jewish student activists, myself from Harvard, a friend of mine, Eden, from Columbia, to talk about the film. And what I shared on the panel was it was so, I don't know, frustrating is the right word, but hang on, this documentary was made 20 years ago. And Joseph Moussad, by the way, continues to teach at Columbia. And it really underscored how this political indoctrination had been building for years. It was meticulous, it was well planned, it was well orchestrated. And so when people ask me my reaction to the anti-Semitism, not just at Harvard, but across college campuses, across graduate schools, my reaction is relatively succinct, but it's relatively consistent, which is I'm shocked, but I'm certainly not surprised because this is the inevitable outcome of decades and decades of well-orchestrated political indoctrination masquerading itself as intellectual discourse and academic rigor when it is literally nothing other than a deep-seated obsession of the Jewish state and a hatred of the Jewish people.
So, Shabbos, let's talk about October 7th. What happened at Harvard and what did you see?
Yeah, October 7th is certainly a day I won't be able to forget anytime soon. And before I even tell you what happened, I think it's really important for your listeners to appreciate that we young people, I'm 25, we did not relate to Israel in a way that perhaps our parents or grandparents did. Israel was a place where we took for granted because it's a strong Western country, and you don't question the existence of a strong Western country like Brazil or Canada or Ireland. You just assume that this is a country that is here on the map, and we do not relate to the first. I was 5 years old during the first Intifada, excuse me, the second Intifada. I was not alive during the first Intifada. I was not alive during the first Lebanon War. 73, 67, Suez Canal, 48. I just do not relate to Israel as a country that struggles for its survival. Israel is a place where, as I said, I go to study. It's where some of my siblings live. It's where I'll go for Passover vacation. Maybe I'll move there one day, but it's not a place where I question its legitimacy, its survival, its existence. That would be silly. And October 7th was a paradigm shift whereby we now related and understood Israel in the way that our parents and grandparents understood Israel, where it is a fledgling country that needs international support. And our generation will always be defined as the October 7th generation, because that was a wake-up call for all of us. Now, some of us went in the opposite direction, saying that this is a genocidal state that needs to be torn down. But I would say the majority of us went in the other direction, which is we now wear our support of Israel on our sleeves in a way that we just did not before, simply because we took it for granted. So
And it
October
woke up a
7th,
lot of people too that were really unaffiliated and had no connection either to their Judaism or Israel.
right? This is where we get the term of the October 8th Jew, someone who saw the horror unfold and then said, I want to be involved. Count me in. I'm Jewish. These are my values. These are my principles, and I want to be part of the community. This is why JNF, for example, which I speak at their events, and I'm a huge fan of, and Russell, if you're watching, hi. This is why
Russell is one of our regular listeners, you know.
Oh, good, 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 good. But this is why organizations like JNF are so important. And on the flip side, so many Jews, even young Jews, flocked to organizations like JNF, saying, I want to be part of the solution. What can I do to help? I want to plant trees. I want to rebuild communities. I want to donate money, so JNF plays a significant role in this story. But anyway, so October 7th is this joyous Jewish holiday. It's Simchas Torah, Shmini Atzeres, and I'm at Harvard Chabad. And as I said, we're celebrating the completion of the Bible, of the Torah, and we're dancing and we're celebrating, and mind you, we're drinking. And the day takes a bizarre turn because all these rumors begin to circulate that there was a bombing. No, it was a shooting. No, it was a stabbing. And again, I'm sure your listeners, by virtue of them knowing JNF, are probably more familiar than I am, which is in an almost sick, perverted, cynical way. When there's a terrorist attack, it's like, okay, it's par for the course. The yeshiva I studied at in Israel, um, our rabbi was stabbed to death outside of Jaffa Gate by a Palestinian terrorist. So terrorism was not good. There should be a forceful response. But again, in an almost awful way, we've become numb to it or accustomed to it. So when we heard there was a terrorist attack, okay, I mean, we're sorry, but number one, it was par for the course, and number two, an observant Jew, I'm not using my phone on the Jewish holidays, on the Sabbath. So I didn't really know what was happening anyway. And the problem was, as the day went on and the day turned into night, the rumors strengthened and the rumors persisted. And it became readily apparent that, as I said, what we young Jews were experiencing was something we never experienced before. This was not just a terrorist attack. This was an all-out assault on the Jewish people. And my rabbi went up to me and he said, because I have siblings who live in Israel, grandparents, aunts, uncles, friends. He said, if you really feel the need to, why don't you go back to your apartment and take out your phone and contact your loved ones? And that's what I did for the first time in my life. I was using my phone on the Jewish holiday. And thank God, after a couple hours, I was able to locate my loved ones, and thank God they were okay. But that was not true of all Jewish students at Harvard. And it's not true of all Jewish students across the country, many of whom lost directly relatives or friends or family. And the story of October 7th, yes, it's defined by October 8th in terms of the Jews who wanted to expose themselves to Jewish communal life, but also the inverse is true. As we young American Jews were experiencing a new reality and we're trying to contact our loved ones,
Mhm.
our classmates, our professors, our friends and colleagues on the night of October 7th. This is not a year after the fact. This is not even a month after the fact.
There were terrorists still in Israel then.
Terrorists still in Israel. The attack is still ongoing. On the night of October 7th, as my classmates are watching on TV in real time the images of Jewish women like Naama Levy leading from their private areas, as they're watching Jewish babies like Fear and Ariel crying as they're being hoarded onto motorcycles by strangers and being deported into Gaza, as they're watching the images of mangled, charred, burnt bodies, the immediate reaction of 34 student groups at Harvard, from the Feminist Society to the Bengali dance troupe to the Muslim Student Association, the immediate reaction of 34 student groups at Harvard is to jump out of bed, some are still in their pajamas, to draft what they called an emergency statement to blame Jews for the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. It's not hyperbole, it's not speculation, it's not exaggeration. The statement literally begins, we hold the Israeli regime entirely responsible for all ongoing violence in the Middle East. No condemnation or even mention of the word Hamas. And in fact, three of the leading anti-Israel activists at Harvard, they're asked in a documentary that I took part in called Crisis on Campus from PBS Frontline. They were asked 6 months after the issuing of this statement. The filmmaker said, given the blowback, given the hurt, given the controversy elicited by your statement, do you regret not condemning or even mentioning Hamas in that statement? And these three girls, your listeners should watch the clip themselves. They look at each other and they do this. Um, no, we don't regret not mentioning Hamas. We didn't think it was relevant. We didn't think it was relevant. And I hope you and your listeners can appreciate what I tell President Trump, what I tell Democrats and Republicans in the House and the Senate, what I tell the national media, what I was just saying on Piers Morgan as they were yelling at me. This is not merely a Jewy issue or an Israel issue anymore, because when you have the alleged best and brightest of a given populace, a given society, a given campus, who can see the murder of 45 Americans on live TV, who can see the abduction of a dozen Americans on live TV, who can see the rape and the mutilation and the burning of Jews, and the immediate reaction to side with the terrorists who did that thing, then it stops becoming a micro Israel issue and starts becoming a macro Western civilization issue. Why do we care about Harvard and Columbia and Penn and all these universities? It's because these are institutions that purport to train the next generation of American leaders. And by and large, they are kind of right. It's not an exaggeration at all to state, statistically speaking, I probably sat in a room with a future congressman, a future senator, even a future president of the United States. And if these are America's future policymakers, if these are America's future judges and jurors, if these are America's future authors of the books your kids and grandkids are going to read, then America is at a dangerous inflection point. And that is what I try to tell whoever is willing to listen.
And it's not only the Ivies. I look at Hunter College, for example, here in Manhattan, which is a hotbed of anti-Israel activity. And a lot of those kids that are graduating from the teacher school, for example, are teaching the next generation because, and we'll talk about it if we have time in just a moment, the whole K through 12 aspect of it, that, these kids are really indoctrinated before they even get to college.
You're absolutely right. I actually have a sister who's at Hunter College, and she relates her personal experiences and the stories that she's experienced. And yes, the reason I think we fixate, the mainstream media at least fixates on a select few, is because the understanding is, well, hang on a second, if this is happening at Harvard, which is again the alleged best and brightest, it plays in the psyche in the or the imagination of the American people, then how much more so, to use a loaded term, it trickles down into these other universities that don't receive nearly the same amount of attention. As it pertains to K through 12, you totally hit the nail on the head here. The United States Congress in its last term had, I believe, a dozen hearings on anti-Semitism. We, of course, remember the famous context-dependent hearing. We remember the hearing with Manoush Shafik of Columbia. But in my opinion, the most important hearing that Congress held on anti-Semitism was on K through 12. And it was probably the least attended. It was probably, not probably, it was the least watched. The context-dependent Harvard, MIT, Penn hearing has 1.7 billion views on YouTube, whereas the K through 12, maybe a million. And to me, it's so important because when we talk about the Ivy Leagues or even college, we're not talking about a heck of a lot of people. I mean, quantitatively, fewer and fewer Americans are actually going to institutions of higher learning, and certainly fewer and fewer Americans are going, mostly because it's selective, to Ivy League universities. However, when we talk about K through 12, we are talking about tens of millions of people who are by law mandated to go through the K through 12 system. And when you have, for example, this is not exaggeration, this happened, if you have in Sioux Falls, Iowa, a third grade teacher reading to her class, I is for Intifada, that is a profound problem. And one of the ironies of the fixation on universities is, in my experience, many people, not all, but many people on a college campus, to varying degrees or another, have sort of made up their mind more or less on most issues, and they gravitate towards clubs or professors or programs that affirm their preconceived notions for the most part. But K through 12, you're discovering who you are. You're impressionable. You're vulnerable. You're developing relationships. And if our ideological adversaries can understand that, which is why they are in fact reading I is for Intifada, which is why you are in fact seeing schools in Toronto and in Montreal taking their middle schoolers to protests in the streets for Palestine, then this political indoctrination becomes not only a lot more pervasive, but a lot more impactful. And it is a very, very dangerous circumstance that we American Jews are sort of realizing how well oiled this operation is to indoctrinate young people with a hatred of the Jewish state. And in addition to the hatred of Israel, a diet of wokeism and diversity, equity, inclusion, and this system of oppressor and oppressed. And it's really, really detrimental to the health of our democracy.
And then Shabbos, how do we combat it?
Right. That's the $1 million question. Look, the short answer is if I knew, I'd be a lot richer than I currently am. I have a couple of ideas based on personal experiences. Number one is litigation. I know I'm a little biased because I sued Harvard, but
We're going to get to that in just a sec. Yes.
sure. So many of these successes that we have seen since October 7th, whether it's on a campus, whether it's through nefariously funded organizations like the Chinese, like Code Pink, which is funded by the Chinese Communist Party, whether it's schools, we have seen that when individuals, be it students or other, hold these universities accountable in the court of law, we see that there are changes. Why does Harvard now adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition, the IRA definition of anti-Semitism? It's because of a lawsuit. Why is it that Columbia University no longer disciplines their students through the faculty, but instead through the provost? It's because of a lawsuit. Why is it that UCLA is now paying $6.5 million to Jewish students, to Chabad, to the ADL, to the Simon Wiesenthal Center? It's because of a lawsuit. The greatest, in my opinion, cultural shift with American Jews since October 7th is the fact that you now have, as routine, young American Jews who are suing their universities and holding their institutions accountable in the court of law. Even 5 years ago, that was just a bizarre notion. And now hundreds of Jewish students, if not thousands, are involved in litigation. So, number one, I think we combat it through the courts of law and through structural change. Number two, I think we also do it in the political sense. Love Donald Trump, hate Donald Trump. I think the policies, whether Trump or Kamala Harris were enacting them, but the policies of withholding federal funds because the expenditure of federal dollars is also an expression of our values. And I think President Eisenhower was right to threaten federal funds to racist schools that refuse to integrate. I think President Obama was right to threaten to withhold funds for schools that refuse to combat sexual assault. And I think President Trump is right now to actually withhold funds to schools that have violated the civil rights of Jewish students. And if your listeners are uncomfortable with that and saying, well, this targets research and STEM grants, then the response is, okay, so tell the universities to stop discriminating and then they'll get the money back. In the same way, you wouldn't tell Israel to stop bombing Hamas. You would tell Hamas to release the hostages and surrender. The pressure must always be on the perpetrators of the crime and not the victims who are simply responding to that crime. So, number one, litigation. Number two, the federal government slash politics. And number three, which I actually think is the most important, and this only pertains to the Jewish community, we respond by doubling down on what makes us a unique and successful and remarkable people. Reinvest radically as quickly as possible into Jewish experiential programs. Make sure that there is not a single American Jew today who's going to public school because their parents can't afford a Jewish day school. Make sure that Jewish students, all American Jews in this country, have the opportunity to go to a Jewish summer camp. Make sure, like the Alexander Muss High School program, which is a subsidiary of JNF, make sure that every single American Jew has the opportunity to go to Israel on an experiential educational program. So I'm not saying don't combat anti-Semitism. What I am saying is number one, the anti-Semitism industrial complex hasn't particularly worked. If it did, we would not have seen the rates of anti-Semitism we see now. What I am saying is if you truly want to combat anti-Semitism, give young American Jews the ability to identify proudly and strongly and confidently with the state of Israel, with their Jewish identity, with the Hebrew Bible, with 3,000 years of Jewish history. That is how you build strong and immovable communities, because I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but a dirty secret in the Jewish community is a lot of the people who, for example, signed on to that letter at Harvard University on October 7th, who called for an intifada, who took part in the encampments. A lot of those people were Jewish. And these are Jews, I know them personally, these are Jews who did not go to Israel, who can't identify Israel on a map, who don't have an affiliation with the Jewish synagogue, who didn't go to Jewish day school. So if you truly want to combat anti-Semitism, we would ensure that young American Jews are passionate, educated, and inspired to live a Jewish-oriented life as quickly as possible, as early as possible.
Well said. And I would add something else, Shabbos, because I think in many ways we're all living in bubbles or we're all living in echo chambers. And I would also add dialogue there as well, wherever possible, for those people that aren't Israel engaged, those people that aren't Jewish, have a conversation with them. Ask them, do you have any questions about Israel? Do you have any questions about Judaism? Invite them over for a Shabbat dinner. In other words, embrace them, because we actually have a lot more allies than I think that we do have. Yet, I think there are so many people for which Israel just isn't simply on their radar. For example, I always like to cite Ido Aharoni, former consul general here in New York, Ambassador Ido Aharoni, a friend of the program, a personal friend, who talks about the 10, 20, 70% paradigm. 10% of Israel people are just totally lost. They're never going to listen to you. The 20% are people like us. And then you have the 70% out there for which Israel doesn't even register. It's not on their radar. And it's important to reach out to those people as well and to begin to have a dialogue with them. So I just want to add that to your list. Now, we've skirted around the issue of a lawsuit here. So in the interest of time, I just want you just to share in broad brushstrokes the lawsuit that you were part of at Harvard and then the result with it before we move on to a bunch of other topics.
Sure. So we filed a lawsuit against Harvard in January of 2024 pertaining to really obvious civil rights violations of Jewish students on campus. We had seen a physical assault at Harvard Business School. We had seen a Jewish undergrad being spat on. We had seen an Israeli student being told by her professor to leave the classroom because her nationality made others uncomfortable. A Harvard employee challenged me to debate him as to whether Jews orchestrated 9/11, and then uh, um, posted a threatening video. I had private armed security. So many, many incidents that boiled over. Harvard's response when we filed the lawsuit was not to recognize the reality of anti-Semitism, was not to apologize for their behavior, was not to come to the negotiating table. They filed a motion to dismiss with prejudice, meaning they were asking a judge toss out Kestenbaum's lawsuit
Mhm.
and set a legal precedent so that, no Jewish student in the future could hold us accountable for anti-Semitism. And they did that twice. As the second time was after we filed an amended complaint, an update to our lawsuit after the encampments. And Harvard's response, excuse me, the judge, Judge Richard Stearns of the Federal District Court of Massachusetts, he issued in July a 25-page scathing ruling, writing in part, quote, "The facts as pled show Harvard failed its Jewish students." He tossed out Harvard's double motions to dismiss, and we became the first case in American history pertaining to the civil rights violations of Jewish students on a campus to be allowed to go to trial, to survive the motion to dismiss. That had never happened before. And I don't know if proud is the right word because it's a damning indictment on the state of higher education that Jews have to do this, but for lack of a better word, proud that Kestenbaum v. Harvard has now been cited by half a dozen other cases brought by Jewish students across the country. Kestenbaum v. Harvard has been cited by the federal government as a rationale, in part, for withholding federal funds from Harvard University. So we set legal precedent. We did what we did not think was possible. So I'm very, very proud of our efforts, and all credit goes to our incredible legal team and mostly to the students who were brave to put their stories on paper and to say, this is what happened to me. And I want to ensure that this does not happen to anyone else, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Black, white. In terms of the outcomes of the case, so there's sort of two parts to this answer. The first part was the four other students who settled. And then the second part is when I settled. I'll start with my story first because it's easier in the sense that the terms of the settlement are confidential, so I can't discuss them. But suffice to say, I agreed to it, and had I not thought that the terms were great, I would not have agreed to it, and I'll leave it at that. The first settlement we negotiated with the university, and eventually I decided to not sign my name just because I didn't think it went far enough. But what we negotiated with the university on was the adoption of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, IRA. We negotiated an official partnership with an Israeli university that Harvard needs to now have, which I think is actually pretty remarkable.
You mean
There is now
Harvard never had a affiliation with an Israeli university
Harvard did
before?
not have an official affiliation with an Israeli university, and on the contrary,
That's
they had
surprising.
they had an official affiliation with Birzeit University in the West Bank, which, as policy, does not admit Jews into the university, which has as its student council a Hamas majority student council. I mean, it was shocking. So we did score a lot of structural reform. There's now going to be an annual conference on anti-Semitism funded by the university, where the Brandeis Center, which worked on this case, will be talking about issues pertaining to anti-Semitism in higher education. There's now going to be a mandatory report every year, so we're tracking Harvard's progress. So does it resolve all the longstanding issues? No, but was it an impressive manifestation of structural reform? Absolutely. And coupled with the federal government currently negotiating with Harvard University as it pertains to their treatment of Jewish students and white students and Asian students and other minorities, I'm very, very happy with the way that our case was resolved and by the action of the federal government. So the litigation worked. It really did.
Congratulations. Remind me, Shabbos, if you ever met with former Harvard President Claudine Gay or current President Alan Garber, and if so, what were those conversations like?
Not once did I ever meet with them. And it's not because I didn't try. Not once did they ever respond to an email. Not once did they ever respond to a phone call. Not once did they ever respond to a request to meet. Nothing, zero, nada. And this is even before I filed the lawsuit. As I had mentioned, we filed the lawsuit not because we wanted to, but because we had to, because we had exhausted all other avenues of recourse. And I remember so clearly writing an email to then President Claudine Gay saying, I want to help you. And this is what you should be doing. And I'd love to meet. I was the president and founder of the Harvard Divinity School Jewish Student Association, which isn't saying much. We had, three Jews. But point being, at least on paper, talk to us. We want to help you. And she refused. And I have to be careful. I don't want to disparage anyone, but I think she owes us, she owes the university, she owes the Jewish community an explanation. I do not have pity. And when she wrote this article for an op-ed in the New York Times, sort of explaining why she was resigning, it was just full of wallowing in her own pity. I'm sorry, but you did this to yourself.
In Shabbos, remind me also, were you in the room when she and the MIT and the Penn presidents were testifying? Were you in the room then?
I was actually invited. I was not able to go. Ironically, it's because I had a test that day
Okay. You
on
were a
campus.
student first.
Yeah, student first. But I of course did watch the hearing, and then when I testified in front of Congress twice, and I would go to Capitol Hill quite frequently. But I remember that hearing very, very well because for months, really for more than a year, I had been trying to tell the Jewish community, to try to tell Harvard, to try to tell the American people that Jews are treated qualitatively different than every other minority group. And I had been consistently told that this is just anti-Zionism, this is just free speech, this is just an exaggeration. And now you have the president of the university under oath on live TV in front of Congress insisting on multiple occasions. You can call for the genocide of Jews if it's the right context. And Claudine Gay became the best advocate for Jewish students overnight because she was able to accomplish what I never could, which is to convince the American people that, yes, in fact, Jews are treated differently than every other group. And even then, I was still trying to help. And she never responded.
Mm. You've had your detractors. Some have called you a token because you delivered a speech at the RNC, the Republican National Convention, back in Milwaukee in the summer of 2024. And in fact, your classmate, Zev Michel, penned a piece in the Forward on July 19th, 2024, titled, I'm a Jew studying at Harvard Divinity School. Shabbos Kestenbaum doesn't speak for me. What is your response to both him and generally detractors that you've had?
Yeah, so I try, and I think relatively successfully when I give interviews or speak on the media to not name specific professors or specific students or classmates. I think the exception, of course, is Claudine Gay or Alan Garber because they're in the national spotlight. But professors of mine who treated me with an anti-Israel bias or an anti-Semitic bias, I don't mention their names specifically. Um, I would have assumed that that would have been reciprocal, but evidently not. So, given that this student wrote this article against me, I'm happy to report, and I'm sort of unclear why he wouldn't say this in the op-ed, but Zev Michel was a leader in the encampment. Zev Michel took part in protests calling for an intifada. So I certainly don't speak for him. I don't want to speak for him. I never made any indication that I do speak for him. And I think Zev would have done his readers a tremendous service had he included in this article that he in fact took part in the encampments. So I'd love to use your podcast as an opportunity to once again say I do not speak for all Jews. I do not speak for the Harvard Jewish community. I'm not a spokesman. I don't want to be a spokesman, but certainly I am very proud to say I do not speak for any of the anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, and anti-Semitic students on campus. Don't want to speak for them. Don't want to associate with them. And it's a shame that Zev deliberately did not include that in that op-ed. Zev, I thought in my mind was a friend. I was very friendly with him. We obviously had political disagreements, but that's why, for example, I went to the Harvard Jews for Palestine Liberation events, not as a member, but as an observer to say, hey, I disagree with you, but I respect your right to be here as much as you should respect my right to be here. But as I said, it was never reciprocal. Um, in terms of the Republican National Convention, that's sort of an easy one to debunk because you could watch my speech at the Republican convention and count how many times I mentioned Trump. It's once, and it's in passing. I say I support President Trump's policies. You know how many times I endorse President Trump? Zero. I only endorsed President Trump 2 months after that speech at the Republican convention. And even then, you could watch my speech at the Republican Jewish Coalition. It was a 10-minute speech. The first 9 minutes of the speech is explaining how my party, the Democratic Party, of which I've been a registered member of since the day I turned 18, I voted for Bernie Sanders twice. I marched with Black Lives Matter. I marched when Roe v. Wade was overturned. The first 9 minutes of my speech was explaining how my party abandoned me and let me down, how individuals like Jerry Nadler, the ranking Democratic member on the House Judiciary Committee, fell asleep when I was giving testimony on anti-Semitism, talking about how I was at the Democratic convention and I told them, have a Jewish student speak about anti-Semitism, and I can connect you with young progressive students who've experienced anti-Semitism. And the Democratic convention said, no, thanks, we don't care. So example after example about how my party abandoned me. I did not abandon the party, to paraphrase Ronald Reagan. So if you don't like President Trump, okay, I mean, I disagree with him on most of the issues, but what's your alternative? What should Jewish students have done instead? Because we were being attacked on our campuses physically, ideologically, religiously, and the response is what exactly? You may not like President Trump, but to his credit, he was the only president who was meeting with us, who was speaking to us. I can't tell you how many times I was with the president and he said that these are the things we are going to do to combat anti-Semitism on campus. And then lo and behold, he's doing it as president. So if you don't like him, okay, what's your alternative? What's the solution? And they just never offered one.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to give you that platform and that opportunity to address all that in case people Google you and they might have questions. So you just answered those questions. Well, as I mentioned at the top of the program, Shabbos, I wanted to have you on now because we are releasing this episode in the new academic year. So really, what do you see unfolding in the new school year for Jewish students, for Israeli students on campuses?
Well, apropos your first question, well, because of President Trump's really aggressive measures to combat anti-Semitism and to hold these institutions accountable, we are seeing structural change. A measure of the settlement that I forgot to mention, the first settlement at Harvard University, was it recognized that anti-Zionism is in fact anti-Semitism, and that when you have a club, for example, that says Zionists not welcomed, that is in fact anti-Semitism. So what we are seeing, and we saw a glimpse of it in the spring semester of 2025, we're seeing that these universities are really trying to stamp out these fires as soon as they prop up. Does that mean that the structural reforms as it pertains to political indoctrination in the classrooms and the activist professors are no longer a problem? No, they're certainly a problem, a profound problem, a problem that no amount of litigation or federal action can really address. It's really the universities need to come to the conclusion themselves that it is not in their best interest to hire professors who tell students not how to think, but what to think. Having said that, do I predict further encampments? Not really. Do I predict the violence that we saw at the University of Pennsylvania or at Tulane or at Columbia? Not really. Not because the students or the outside agitators don't want to be violent anymore, but simply because the universities recognize there's a new sheriff in town. And if they continue down the path of last year and the year before that, they will continue to be held accountable, both in the court of law and with a strong response from the federal government.
And Shabbos, your advice then for students that are starting school this year?
My advice is what I say to any student, Christian, Jew, Muslim that I meet, which is be proud of your religious identity. We're actually seeing a revival amongst Gen Z in religious institutions. It used to be that social scientists would warn that younger Americans are increasingly secular and they have sort of thrown off the mantle of divine involvement. And we're seeing that's really not true. Young people are really passionate about their religious identity. And so if you're a Jewish person, recognize you did nothing wrong. You were not calling for the ethnic genocide of Muslims. You were not blocking the access to libraries or classrooms. You were not throwing rocks into buildings and calling for an intifada. Be proud and confident, not just of your Jewish identity, but also recognize that you are part of a 3,000-year-old story, the story of the Jewish people. I remember I actually spoke at a JNF breakfast. It was outside of DC. I don't remember the exact town. And it was in a pretty large synagogue. And after the breakfast, the organizer came up to me and said, "This synagogue actually houses a school as well, and the eighth graders of this school are going to Israel next week. Do you mind sharing a few words with them?" I said, "No problem." So I went to their classroom and I had told them, "I don't know you, you don't know me. Our grandparents, I assume, didn't know each other either. But if you were to tell our grandparents or great grandparents that a bunch of eighth graders are going to the state of Israel, and all they need to do is go on a flight for 12 hours, and they are going to touch the stones of the Western Wall, and they're going to hike up the Masada Mountain, and they are going to swim or float in the Dead Sea," they would not have believed you. They would have thought you were talking about some fantasy. And some of our grandparents and great grandparents are still alive. And if you were to tell them these things, they would say, "Had you told me this when I was younger, I would not have known what language you were speaking in." And so I told these eighth graders, I said, "You are living in miraculous times. Whether you're religious, you believe in God, as David Ben Gurion said, I'm going to totally butcher the line, but to be a realist in Israel, you have to believe in miracles. We are living in such remarkable times where there's a state of Israel just 3 years after the Auschwitz gas chambers. And not only is there a state, but you can participate in it. You can support it. You can touch the stones of the Western Wall. That has not been the case for what, 2,500 years. And you are living in an epoch in history where the overwhelming majority of the Jewish people could not relate to what you were even saying, let alone experiencing." And that's my message is yes, there's anti-Semitism on campuses, and yes, there are anti-Zionists, and there are those who seek to negate the Jewish people from the Jewish homeland. But ultimately, if we ignore that, we ignore the hostilities and we ignore the outright hatred, and we recognize, how do I phrase this? We recognize not those who seek to harm us, but rather we recognize the miraculous nature of the time we're living in. I think naturally you'll see Jews a lot more confident and a lot more public about their support for Israel and their association and affiliation with their Jewish identity.
And despite everything, Shabbos, there really has never been a better time to be Jewish than the time that we're living in right now.
Oh, 100%. And I gotta say, not to toot my own horn, God forbid,
Go
but
ahead.
the first thing I did after October 7th was I bought a one-way ticket to Israel. On October 13th, I was in Israel and I was delivering supplies to army bases, and I was digging graves for soldiers who were unfortunately were killed in Gaza, and I was playing guitar in hospitals. And I think that's what makes the Jewish people so remarkable is when we see danger, we kind of run to it. When the state of Israel is under attack, the amount of people who were going to Israel post October 7th was simply remarkable. And when people said, "Aren't you scared? Aren't you?" I said, it's so much more important for me to be with my people in Israel than it is to, be in a classroom at Harvard and being yelled on how I'm a genocidal baby killer, apartheid individual. So that's what makes our people unique. When we see the state of Israel under attack, we throw our support. And again, this is why I'm not saying this because JNF paid me to say it or JNF wants me to say it. Although if they want to pay me, I'm certainly okay with it. But I'm saying this because I believe it and I know it to be true. Organizations like JNF were certainly of a major source of strength and comfort for me, whereby I knew that there was a Jewish future because of organizations like JNF who are saying we're willing to invest hundreds of millions of dollars.
And indeed, and when you talk about right after October 7th, JNF just kicked in, helping everybody in Israel, whether it was in the north or the Israel envelope, as we call it right now, those communities outside of Gaza and all the missions that went as well. I mean, I went in January myself, and then I also joined a brief JNF mission. But again, it was that need just to be in Israel, truly. One other point about campuses, and then we're going to move on to a couple Shabbos questions, and then we're going to wrap because I'm super mindful of the time and the clock. We should share, though, that there are some universities that are getting it right. And my regular listeners know that I always give a shout out to my undergraduate alma mater, Washington University in St. Louis, which has been exceptional in welcoming Jewish students and making Jewish students feel safe and very much at home. So we don't want to say that the vitriol has just exploded all over the place. There are some universities that indeed are getting it right. So we just want to give them a shout out. Now, just moving on to a couple other Shabbos bases, because you are so young and you've had the most fascinating life so far, and you have the rest of your life that I know is going to just unfold just in a tremendous, tremendous way. And just on very much of a personal note first, of course, the curiosity of your name Shabbos, and I was doing my homework and I found that you have 7 names. And correct me if I'm on the mark here. Your name is Alexander Israel X Yisroel Yakutiel Yakir Shabbos Kestenbaum.
Wow, that was very impressive and very accurate. So well done.
What does your driver's license look like? Do they have to use the back of it? The same
Right.
goes for your passport, Shabbos.
So the driver's license and passport are actually short. It's only Alexander Israel X Kestenbaum. The birth certificate, though, is quite long. The birth certificate has all the names.
And it goes
Um,
to the second page.
Yes, exactly. The birth certificate, we had to pay extra per letter or something. But I'm one of 7 siblings, as I think I mentioned, and we all have pretty unusual names. So my mom is a ardent Zionist. She would play Naomi Shemer in the car on our drive to school each morning. She would always have blue and white cookies for us. So she grew up in the B'nai Akiva system,
And both
and
your parents immigrated to the United
yes,
States from
yes.
from the United Kingdom.
Exactly, from the United Kingdom. I'm a first generation American. So my brother was born on Israeli Independence Day. So his name is Independence, in honor of the state of Israel. So we all have a bit of unusual names, but suffice to say, I'm very grateful to have grown up in a household that I did, whereby there was a strong focus on Israel, on Jewish culture, on Jewish history. And I think that's where I got this passion and determination from.
And so, of course, you were born on Shabbat or Shabbos. That's why your name is Shabbos, or one of your names is Shabbos. And people know you. I guess your good friends call you Shabby, but you're also known to all of us as really Shabbos. I was born, by the way, on Som Gedalia, but my name
Oh,
is not Gedalia. It is Steve.
okay.
And by the way, fun fact, I had my bris on Yom Kippur. So there,
Oh man,
because if you're born on Som Gedalia, do the math, right? Okay,
that's
just saying.
very funny.
Just one quick one. The X, the
The
letter
X,
X,
it's
where'd
it's
that come
it's
from?
it's just the letter. It's
This,
not
of
E.
course, is pre Elon Musk. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yes, we thought of it first.
Yes.
Very often when I fly internationally, security will often stop me and have me explain the X. They often think it's a mistake that we accidentally wrote it, or they'll say, oh, like Malcolm X. And I say, sure, but no relation. The X is because my great grandfather, Yisrael Yekusiel, often went by Xiel, Xiel. And I guess to honor or pay homage to Xiel instead of naming me Xiel, my parents sort of figured, we'll just give him an X. Two of my other siblings also have letters. So one has a J, one has a B, and for whatever reason, I'm the X.
Love it. Would you talk just real briefly about your work in and with Poland?
Oh, yeah, this is my favorite topic. Before October 7th, I wanted to be
I
noted
think I'm
for
going to
my,
be keeping you a little bit after time here, Shab.
yeah, it's
So,
all good, all good.
okay.
I,
We
I
just want to
wanted
warn our listeners and viewers there because we are on YouTube too. Okay, go ahead.
Right. I wanted to be known as the Poland guy, and I wanted to be paid to travel across the world and speak about my adventures in Poland. The anti-Semitism thing, that was, not really part of the plan. So I first went to Poland when I was 18 years old. I wanted to go to Poland my whole life, and my parents said you have to wait until you're mature enough. And I think they were right in hindsight. So I went with an organization called Heritage, run by Michael Burrell. And Heritage's slogan is Heritage Tours, because you'll only do this once. And I remember the following year, I went with my yeshiva to Israel the first time, to Poland the first time. And the following year, I kind of emailed Michael and said, hey, I know I did Poland already, but can I do it again? And he essentially said, as long as you're willing to pay, sure. And I don't know if you can see, but the background of my phone for the last 7 years
Yes.
has been the grave of Menachem Mendel Morgenstern, otherwise known as the Hasidic Rebbe of Kutsk. Kutsk is a town in Poland. And it was a transformative moment for me, getting to meet him, so to say, at least meet his grave. And I had decided when I was at his grave that I wanted to spend as much time as I could connecting to the 1,000 years of Jewish life in Poland. So I clean up Jewish cemeteries. I went to Harvard not to sue them, to study the Holocaust. So obviously there's a lot to learn and to study. I've been to Auschwitz more times than I care to count. I just did a 60-mile bike ride with the Jewish Community Center of Krakow, where we did a bike ride 60 miles from Auschwitz to the JCC. I'm involved with the JCC of Krakow, which is led by Jonathan Ornstein, and they do incredible work revitalizing Jewish life in Poland. They have Polish Holocaust survivors who still live in Poland. And I'm just absolutely fascinated and in love with the country. It's without doubt the safest place to be a Jewish person in Europe. I wear my kippah all the time, anywhere. The only time I've been stopped is when people either ask me for a picture or when they say Shalom Aleichem. So it's a beautiful country. Obviously, it has a dark history, which we learn and preserve and honor. But Jews were living in Poland for 1,000 years. And I don't think we should allow 6 years, again, of a very brutal and awful episode, which, as I said, I clean Jewish cemeteries. I work in Holocaust education. I know Holocaust survivors. And as much as we should focus on that 6 years, we should also focus on, well, what came before. Why were Jews living in Poland for 1,000 years? My family comes from Tarnov. My great, great, great times 10 grandfather was Rabbi Moshe Isserlis, the Ramah, who's buried in Krakow, the revered Orthodox rabbi. And oh my, I just love it. And honestly, had October 7th not happened and had my life not gone in this direction, I could have seen myself living in Poland and working for the JCC full time. I had lived there for a summer and I just absolutely loved it. I was working with Ukrainian refugees who were part of JCC, who were living in Krakow at the time. As I said, I was cleaning Jewish cemeteries. I was speaking at commemorations for the chief rabbi of Poland all over the country. I was meeting young Poles who were interested in discovering their Jewish identity. So it's the miraculous rebirth of Polish Jewish life, only an hour's drive from Auschwitz.
Shabbos, you're in your 20s. You have the whole rest of your life. There's no reason why you can't one day spend
Yes,
X number of years. I'm using the term X because that is what your name's X number of years, indeed, in Poland. These days, though, as I mentioned at the top of the show, you're a PragerU guy. So for those unfamiliar with PragerU, share what that's all about and what you're doing.
sure. So the reason I moved to Los Angeles is not because I love LA.
And by
Spoiler,
the way, if anyone's watching via YouTube, the sun is coming down in Shabbos's living room right there.
oh man,
It's
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 sorry about that.
California sun, and we're enjoying it for the whole episode.
Yeah, the California Sun. So, PragerU is a conservative think tank, but really they're producing content for schools, for young people, for individuals like myself who were really liberal and then kind of did a 180. And they offered me a position to start my own show, focused on the intersection of religion and politics. So I'll be starting that show sometime in the fall, hopefully sooner rather than later. And
Congrats.
it's a really great opportunity for me to explore ideologies and a political movement that I'm very new and unused to. So they essentially they stand for American exceptionalism, American democracy, American values, liberalism in its classic sense of, property rights and freedom and religious liberties. And I'm very excited, not so excited to live in Los Angeles, but certainly excited for this new chapter of my life, where, as I said, I'll be starting a show really geared towards young people about the virtues of both, certain political ideology and also religion and religious institutions. So I'm very excited to be working with PragerU. And you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, social media, and to see some great content.
Love it. And as we begin to wind down our conversation now, Shabbos, I can't have you on without asking you about your having donated a kidney recently.
Mhm.
Where did
Yeah,
that come from and how are you feeling?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm feeling fine. So if there's anyone who is unsure, I'll tell you this is a little crazy. I don't recommend people do this, but I donated my kidney. And then 6 days later, I moved to Los Angeles. And 2 weeks after that, I did a 60-mile bike ride from Auschwitz to the JCC. So I'm not recommending people really fast track their recovery.
To be in one's 20s again.
Right, but suffice to say, my recovery was nothing but smooth. I am 25. When I was 18, I wrote to an organization called Renewal. Renewal is a kidney donation organization. I had said, I want to donate my kidney. And they said, thank you. Come back to us when you're 21. So I did. I came back to them when I was 21 and I did a blood test. I have a very rare blood type called AB positive, AB positive, which means that I can receive blood from anyone, but I can only give to other AB positive blood types. So I'm very selfish. And most people don't have that blood type. I think it's only 2% of the world's population. So I was in their system for a very, very long time. 4 years later, so 5 months ago, I get a call from Renewal, and they had said, finally, we have matched you with someone who could really use a kidney. And I said, well, thank you, but unfortunately, the timing really doesn't work out because I'm moving to Los Angeles. Can we do it in the winter of 2025, December time? And they essentially said, look, the choice is yours, but he may not have that much longer. So I don't think we can really wait to December of 2025. So I said, okay, it is what it is. If a man's life is at stake, then it is what it is. So I took a series of blood tests and more tests than I know how to count. So again, if anyone is watching, when you donate a kidney, you're at the healthiest point of your life. Only 30% of all donors are actually approved to donate their kidney, and that is because they do every test imaginable. I was in the hospital for 12 full hours just doing tests, so they knew that I was healthy. And then the morning of, I'm in the waiting room and I'm not allowed to know who my recipient is until about a week or two after, although I still don't know who my recipient is. And the recipient writes me a letter. The recipient doesn't know who I am, so they say, "Dear donor." And they say, "Thank you so much. Because of what you're doing, I can be a father again. I can be a husband again. I can go back to my kids. All I know about my recipient is he's a dad and he has two sets of twins. That's all I know." And interestingly enough, even though I have never met him and he has never met me and we don't know each other, when I donated the kidney, he was in the room right opposite me. So they can very quickly take the kidney and put it into him. And I've yet to meet him, although I'm happy to. And I think eventually we will meet. I think Renewal is going to do some type of big reveal one day, but I don't regret it at all. Full disclosure, the first 2 days were difficult. There was a lot of pain, which is normal, but the hospital took good care of me. Renewal took good care of me. They gave me a lot of swag. In fact, the blanket behind me is from Renewal. So it's something that was really meaningful and simple. I know it's not simple for most people, but if you have any listeners out there who are thinking if kidney donation is right for them, all I will say is I donated my kidney less than 3 months ago, and I feel fine. The only thing you would notice is if I don't have a shirt on, because you would see a pretty nasty scar. But other than that, I'm okay.
And what a mitzvah, right? And especially where the recipient doesn't know the giver and the giver doesn't know the recipient.
Yeah, I mean, we have two kidneys, and you can live a totally healthy, normal life with only one of them, and I don't regret it at all, and I'll leave it at that.
Absolutely beautiful. And on that note, we're going to leave it right there. Alexander, Israel X, Yisrael, Yakutiel, Yakir, Shabbos, Kestenbaum. This has been such a pleasure to have you on IsraelCast. I certainly hope that this is one of many times that you join us here on the program. We want to thank you for being so generous with your comments and your time. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
All right. And we'll have info about, I'm just going to call him Shabbos. Shabbos on the show notes page of this very episode on our website, jnf.org/IsraelCast. And indeed, as for IsraelCast, we do release new episodes of the show every other Wednesday. I don't know why you would want to miss an episode. And indeed, just so you don't, do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Simply search for IsraelCast. And don't forget to rate and review us to make it easier for more folks around the world to find us. You can always enjoy the show also by visiting us at our website. Once again, it's jnf.org/IsraelCast. And indeed, it takes a whole moshav to put IsraelCast together. And for that, we thank Vivian Grossman, Stefan Oberman, and Jessica Mento. Our editor, of course, is the fantastic Jay Rothman. And the music that you hear at the top until the program is titled My Eden. It's by the very talented Rafi Malkiel from his album Water on the Tzaddik label. IsraelCast is powered by Jewish National Fund USA, your voice in Israel. And for more info about JNF USA, do visit jnf.org. And if you'd like to write to us with story ideas or just to say howdy, I know Shabbos would love to hear from you, wouldn't you, Shabbos?
Yes, I would.
All right, and so would yours truly. So do email us at israelcast@jnf.org. Meantime, I'm Stephen Shalowitz. Thank you for tuning in and looking forward to having you join us on future episodes of IsraelCast.